The true power of ancient Egypt was kneaded by hand and baked in a simple clay oven. That daily loaf of bread fueled the empire, from the farmer in the field to the pharaoh on his throne. By the end of this journey, you will know exactly what those bakers cooked and how their recipes reveal the secrets of a civilization that lasted for millennia. We will uncover why bread could be used to pay the workers who built the pyramids and what mysterious ingredients went into a loaf meant for the gods. What do you think it took to feed a society that shaped our world? The rhythm of ancient Egyptian life was set to the sound of grinding grain. Every morning across the Nile Valley, the steady crunch of grinding stones echoed from homes, a constant reminder that the empire was built on flour. This was the soundtrack of survival, the first step in creating the single most important food anyone would eat that day. From the humblest farmer to the pharaoh believed to be a god on earth, no one's meal was considered complete without bread. It was the foundation of every plate, the true staple of life. Imagine the air thick with the warm, earthy smell of baking, drifting from simple household ovens and larger communal ones shared by a neighborhood. This was the universal scent of community and sustenance. A family breaking their daily bread was a scene repeated millions of times, connecting all levels of society through this one simple act. But its role went far beyond the dinner plate. Bread was so fundamental, so trusted that it became money. The men who moved the colossal stones for the Great Pyramid at Giza did not work for gold or silver. They were paid in bread and beer, a ration that was both their wage and their fuel. This was a society that literally built its monuments on the promise of a daily loaf. And that loaf was not just one simple thing. The world of the Egyptian baker was far more diverse and inventive than you might think. This empire of bread began with two humble grains, emmer wheat and barley. Neither of these ancient staples looked or behaved like the uniform wheat we know today. Emmer wheat, the more prized of the two, was a stubborn grain. Each seed was tightly encased in a tough, inedible husk called a hull. This husk did not thresh off easily. It demanded a brutal, multi-step process of pounding and parching to free the edible kernel inside. This relentless effort meant that Egyptian flour was never pure white and fluffy. It was coarse, flecked with tiny fragments of the stubborn hull, creating a bread that was dense, fibrous, and packed with nutrition. The very difficulty of its preparation made the final loaf a testament to human labor. The journey from field to flour was dictated by the heartbeat of the Nile itself. Each year, the river would flood, its waters receding to leave behind a miraculous gift, a fresh layer of rich black silt that fertilized the fields for free. Farmers would then sow their precious seeds into this damp, fertile earth. The entire kingdom held its breath for a successful harvest. A poor inundation, a flood that was too weak or too violent, meant a meager harvest. And a meager harvest meant famine, unrest, and a pharaoh whose divine connection was suddenly in question. The fate of civilization rested on the success of these grains. And just like everything in ancient Egypt, these grains had a social hierarchy. Emmer wheat, with its richer flavor and slightly higher status, was often destined for the finer tables of the elite, the priests, and the offerings to the gods. Barley, while still vital, was the grain of the masses. It was the primary fuel for the armies and the workforce, and it was the undisputed king of another essential staple, beer. So the very type of grain in your loaf spoke volumes about your place in the world. From the coarse, dark barley bread that fueled a pyramid builder to the slightly refined emmer loaf placed in a royal tomb, every bite was a story of soil, river, and social standing. Once the precious grain was harvested and freed from its stubborn husk, it faced its final transformation. This was the domain of the woman of the house, a daily ritual of immense physical effort. Her primary tool was the saddle quern, a heavy, sloping slab of stone that rested on the ground. Kneeling before it, she would take a smaller, hand-held stone called a mono and begin the relentless back-and-forth motion of crushing the grains. This was not a quick task. It took hours of grueling labor to produce enough coarse flour to feed a single family for a day. The rhythmic scrape and grind of stone on stone was a sound as familiar as the Nile's own currents, a testament to the unseen labor that powered the empire. This constant, repetitive work left its mark on the body. The knees, hips, and shoulders of these women bore the brunt of the strain, with skeletons from the period showing clear signs of degenerative joint disease and arthritis, a permanent record of a lifetime spent providing the most basic sustenance. And the flour itself told another story. The grinding stones were not perfectly smooth. With every pass of the mono, tiny fragments of quartz and sandstone would wear away, mixing invisibly with the flour. This gritty contamination was an unavoidable part of the ancient diet. Over a lifetime, consuming bread made from this flour acted like sandpaper on teeth, grinding them down to the pulp. This inadvertent damage is so clear on the remains of mummies that archaeologists can identify a bread eater just by looking at their smile. So the very act of creating life-giving food also carried a hidden, lifelong cost, etched into the very bones and teeth of the people. That gritty, nutrient-rich flour held a secret, one that would transform a simple paste into something truly magical: risen bread. This was the great leavening mystery of the ancient world. How did they make their bread light and airy without the little packets of commercial yeast we use today? The answer was all around them, floating invisibly in the very air. Egyptian bakers were masters of capturing wild yeast. They would leave a simple mixture of flour and water exposed to the open air. Wild yeast spores, naturally present in the environment, would settle into this paste and begin to ferment. This created a living, bubbling culture, a prehistoric sourdough starter. A portion of this active, fermented dough could then be mixed into a new batch of flour and water. The wild yeast would feast on the sugars in the grain, releasing carbon dioxide gas. This gas became trapped within the stretchy network of the dough, causing it to puff up and rise, creating those precious air pockets that make bread soft and digestible. A baker would always save a piece of this leavened dough from today's batch to start tomorrow's bread, a chain of life that could continue for years, even generations. But there was another, even more ingenious source of yeast readily available in every community. Remember the beer. The process of brewing beer also relies on fermentation, creating a frothy, yeast-rich foam on top of the brewing vat. It is highly likely that bakers, perhaps working side by side with brewers in large state-run kitchens, would scoop up this baker's yeast and mix it directly into their dough. This created a powerful symbiotic relationship between the bakery and the brewery. The same grains that made the beer could also provide the lift for the bread. So an Egyptian baker had not one, but two revolutionary methods to make their bread rise. They could rely on the slow, tangy fermentation of a wild sourdough starter, or they could harness the fast-acting power of brewer's yeast. This technological leap meant that the daily bread of ancient Egypt was not just a dense, hard brick. It could be a softer, more flavorful, and far more nutritious loaf, a testament to their incredible understanding of the invisible biological world. With the living dough prepared, the baker reached for an array of simple yet brilliant tools. His most iconic instrument was the conical bread mold, a tall, pointed cup made of fired clay. These molds were not just containers, they were the secret to a unique baking technique. A baker would heat the empty molds in the hot embers of the oven until the clay was nearly glowing. He would then quickly pour the soft, wet dough directly into the scorching interior. The heat would instantly create a cooked skin around the dough, trapping the steam and yeast inside, forcing the bread to rise dramatically up the narrow cone. The result was a tall, conical loaf with a crisp crust and an incredibly airy, open crumb inside. This was not the only shape in their repertoire. They used shallow, disc-like molds to create flatbreads, and they even crafted molds in the shapes of animals, people, and sacred symbols for special occasions or temple offerings. Before baking, a baker might press a carved wooden or stone stamp into the top of the loaf. This stamp could bear the seal of a royal bakery, ensuring quality control, or the symbol of a specific temple, marking the bread as a holy offering for a god. It was a simple mark of ownership, divinity, and pride. The baker's toolkit was a study in efficient design. He used wide, shallow wooden bowls for mixing large batches of dough. He employed sieves made of woven reeds or linen to sift out the largest pieces of stone and husk from the flour, a small but crucial step for a slightly less gritty loaf. And then there was the heart of the operation, the oven itself. In a modest household, this might be a simple, dome-shaped clay structure with an opening at the front for fuel and a flat top where discs of dough could be cooked. But in a state bakery feeding hundreds of workers, the ovens were monumental. They were large mud brick platforms with rows of deep, jar-like openings on top. The baker would build a fire inside the structure, heating the entire mass of clay. Once the fire died down, he would sweep out the ashes and carefully place the shaped loaves or preheated molds inside the hot cavities, sealing the openings to bake the bread with retained, radiant heat. This entire process, from the heated mold to the massive oven, was a masterclass in using simple materials to achieve a complex and delicious result. For many Egyptians, the true heart of the neighborhood was not a temple or a market, but the communal bakery. This was a place of constant motion and warmth, where the air shimmered with heat and danced with floating flour. If your family did not own an oven, this was your destination, a daily pilgrimage with a bowl of prepared dough cradled in your hands. You would join a line of neighbors, all waiting their turn for a few moments of the baker's precious fire. The space was loud with the sounds of industry and community. The rhythmic slap of wet dough being thrown into hot molds created a steady percussion. Laughter and urgent conversations competed with the crackle of the fire and the hiss of steam escaping clay. Here, a farmer might learn about a distant cousin's marriage. There, a mother might arrange a future match for her son, all while the scent of golden brown crusts filled the air. This was where news was baked alongside the bread, where the social fabric of the town was woven just as tightly as the gluten in the dough. Inside this flour-dusted world, the bakers moved with the practiced efficiency of a well-drilled team. This was not a solitary craft. A head baker, often marked by the fine layer of white powder coating his arms and chest, would direct the operation. His kneaders were the powerhouse, men with strong shoulders and powerful hands who worked the massive batches of dough in wide troughs, their movements a steady, hypnotic rhythm. Once the dough was ready, the molders took over. Their task required a delicate speed, swiftly shaping the loaves or pouring the batter into the searing hot conical molds without burning their fingers. And always near the great ovens was the fire tender. This was perhaps the most crucial and demanding role. He had to read the heat of the fire bricks like a language, knowing the exact moment to sweep out the ashes and fill the cavernous openings with unbaked bread. His skill meant the difference between a perfectly risen, fragrant loaf and a charred, inedible brick. This division of labor turned baking from a household chore into a high-output industry, capable of feeding an entire workforce or a populous city. The communal bakery was a microcosm of Egyptian society itself, a place where individual roles combined to create something that sustained everyone. For the millions of workers who raised the pyramids and farmed the Nile's banks, bread was not a delicacy but pure, unadorned fuel. Their daily loaf was a world apart from the fancy conical breads of the elite. This was a dense, round disk of emmer or barley, baked quickly on the hot stones of a simple oven or even directly in the ashes of a fire. It was coarse, chewy, and deliberately portable, a meal you could stuff into a cloth pouch at dawn and eat with your hands in the field hours later. This humble flatbread was the engine of the empire. Imagine a laborer at Giza, his muscles aching from moving limestone blocks under the blistering sun. His wage for this superhuman effort was not coin, but a tangible ration of food, a daily allotment of this very bread, a bundle of pungent onions, a few cloves of strong garlic, and a generous portion of thick porridge like beer. This was the standard payment, the currency of survival. Why this specific combination? The bread provided the foundational calories, the slow-burning carbohydrates that powered his body through a 12-hour day of relentless labor. The onions and garlic were more than just flavor. They were practical medicine, offering a boost of vitamin C and other nutrients that helped stave off common illnesses in an era before modern medicine. The beer, far from being just an intoxicant, was liquid bread. It was nutritious, hydrating, and safer to drink than water drawn from irrigation canals, which could be contaminated. Together, this simple meal formed a complete nutritional package, perfectly calibrated for a life of extreme physical exertion. Every bite of that gritty, fibrous loaf was converted directly into the muscle and sweat that built the timeless monuments we still marvel at today. But the baker's art reached its highest form not in the flat fuel of the laborer, but in the sacred geometry of the conical loaf. This distinctive shape, tall and pointed like a miniature mountain, was far more than a clever baking technique. It was divinity made edible. Each conical loaf was a tangible piece of mythology, a symbol of life's very origins. In the Egyptian creation story, the first land to emerge from the endless, chaotic waters of none was a single conical mound. This primordial hill was the birthplace of all life, the first solid ground where the sun god could rise and begin creation. By shaping their bread into this form, the bakers were essentially baking a piece of the universe's genesis into every loaf destined for a god or a tomb. The connection deepens with Osiris, the god of the afterlife and resurrection. Some scholars believe the conical shape also represented his sacred body, or the fertile, life-giving silt that emerged after the Nile's flood. To eat this bread or to offer it was to consume the power of creation and rebirth itself. This transformed the simple act of eating into a profound ritual. During great festivals, these sacred loaves were baked in massive quantities. They were carried in procession to the temples, where priests would present them on altars as offerings to the statues of the gods. The belief was that the deity, though made of stone and gold, would spiritually consume the essence of the bread, a divine exchange that sustained the cosmic order. This same principle applied to the dead. A tomb was not just a final resting place, it was an eternal home, and the deceased needed to eat forever. Dozens of these symbolic conical loaves, often made from the finest emmer flour, were placed in burial chambers. They were not mere decorations, they were functional provisions for the soul's long journey through the underworld. Each loaf was a promise of eternal sustenance, a baked guarantee that the deceased would never go hungry in the afterlife. In the hands of the Egyptian baker, a simple mixture of flour and water could become a mountain, a god, and the key to immortality. Even the most sacred conical loaf could satisfy a more earthly craving. Beyond the savory staples that fueled the workforce, Egyptian bakers possessed a secret for sweetness, turning simple grains into decadent treats. Their most common sweetener was the humble, plentiful date. In kitchens, dates would be pitted and mashed into a thick, sticky, caramel-like paste. This rich, fruity puree could be kneaded directly into dough or, more ingeniously, used as a filling. A baker might take a round of flat dough, place a dollop of the date paste in the center, and then carefully fold the edges over, sealing the sweetness inside before baking. The result was a primitive stuffed pastry, a portable pocket of joy. When you broke it open, the hot, melted date filling would ooze out, a stark and delightful contrast to the plain, gritty crust. This was the common person's dessert, a small luxury accessible to nearly everyone along the Nile. But for the ultimate in sweetness, there was only one source: honey. Beekeeping was a sophisticated practice with hives crafted from hollowed-out logs or stacked clay cylinders. Smoke was used to calm the bees, and keepers would carefully harvest portions of the honeycomb, a sticky, dangerous, and precious operation. Because of this labor-intensive process, honey was a luxury product, a symbol of status and divine favor. A jar of pure honey was worth as much as a fine pot of oil or a batch of linen. It was routinely listed among the treasures delivered to temple storehouses and the palace kitchens. Cakes made for the elite were not just sweetened with honey, they were often drenched in it. Imagine a dense, cake-like bread made from the finest sifted emmer flour, baked until golden, and then soaked in warm, fragrant honey. It would have been intensely sweet with a floral richness and a moist, heavy crumb. These were not everyday snacks, they were delicacies reserved for royal feasts, religious festivals, and offerings to the gods. The temple altars would have gleamed with these honey-glazed cakes, their sweetness believed to be especially pleasing to the deities. So, the ancient Egyptian palate understood the full spectrum of taste, from the life-sustaining saltiness of a laborer's loaf to the divine, heavenly sweetness of a honey cake fit for a pharaoh. Inside the palace walls, the royal bakery operated with the precision of a temple ritual. This was not a single oven in a corner, but a sprawling, specialized facility, a factory of flavor dedicated to a single patron, the pharaoh himself. A small army of master bakers worked in shifts, their roles sharply defined. One team handled nothing but the sacred breads for the morning offerings, ensuring not a single grain was out of place. Another group focused exclusively on the delicate, sweet pastries for the royal table. The sheer variety they produced was staggering, and we know this because the palace accountants meticulously recorded every loaf. Inscriptions on temple walls and administrative papyri list hundreds of different bread names, each denoting a specific recipe, shape, or purpose. There was the bread of the offering, a perfect conical loaf made with the whitest possible flour, destined not for human consumption but for the gods. They baked pomegranate bread, where the jewel-like seeds of the fruit were folded into the dough, creating a tart, colorful speckle in every slice. For state functions, they produced the cake of the ruler, a dense, sweet confection likely enriched with honey, dates, and precious spices like cinnamon imported from the mysterious land of Punt. This was baking elevated to a high art, where every ingredient was chosen for its symbolic meaning and sensory delight. The air in the royal bakery would have been a complex symphony of aromas, the earthy scent of emmer flour mingling with the perfume of exotic spices and the rich sweetness of reducing fruit syrups. A single meal for the pharaoh could feature dozens of these different breads, arranged on platters to create a spectacle of abundance and power. This was the ultimate expression of the baker's craft, proving that in ancient Egypt, a loaf could be as simple as a laborer's wage or as complex and opulent as the crown itself. The most important customer for any master baker was not the pharaoh, but a god. Every day before the sun rose, a procession of priests would carry platters of freshly baked bread into the cool, dark silence of the temple's inner sanctuary. Their destination was the shrine holding the cult statue, the physical home of the deity on earth. The ritual was precise and deeply solemn. The priests would present the loaves, often those perfect conical shapes symbolizing the first land, upon a stone altar. They believed the god's spirit would absorb the essence, the very life force of the bread. This act of divine nourishment was not symbolic, it was a practical necessity. The Egyptians believed that if they stopped feeding the gods would grow weak, and the entire cosmic order, from the Nile's flood to the sun's journey, would crumble into chaos. The bread for these offerings had to be flawless. It was made from the whitest, most finely sifted emmer flour, laboriously processed to remove every last speck of the dark husk and stone grit. No ordinary bread contained such purity. Spices or sweeteners were sometimes added, not for human taste, but to create an aroma considered pleasing to the divine senses. The entire recipe was an act of devotion, a culinary prayer baked into existence. After the ceremony, the physical bread, now imbued with the god's spiritual essence, was removed from the altar. It was not wasted. This now sacred food was distributed among the temple staff, from the high priests down to the scribes and laborers. In this way, a direct, tangible chain connected the baker's hot oven to the priest's daily meal. The baker's craft literally sustained both the human and the divine, feeding the city and the cosmos with every single batch. This sacred contract between the baker and the divine extended even beyond death. For an Egyptian, the end of earthly life was merely a transition, and the journey through the afterlife demanded immense energy. The spirit, or ka, was a tangible double of the person, a vital force that required nourishment just as the living body did. To enter eternity without a reliable food source was the ultimate terror, a sentence to an endless, hungry oblivion. This profound fear of spiritual starvation is why the tombs of nobles and pharaohs were stocked like eternal pantries. Archaeologists opening these sealed chambers for the first time often find, nestled among the gold and jewels, the most humble of treasures, loaves of bread. In the tomb of the young king Tutankhamun, over a dozen loaves were discovered, each one carefully placed there over 3,000 years ago. They are shrunken and rock-hard now, mere shadows of their former selves, yet their shapes remain perfectly distinct. Seeing these actual, desiccated loaves is startling, a direct, tangible link to the funeral day of a pharaoh. They are not artistic representations, they are the real provisions, meant to be consumed by the king's ka forever. But what if these physical loaves were somehow damaged or destroyed over the centuries? The ancient Egyptians had a brilliant, magical solution for that. The walls of the tomb itself were the ultimate insurance policy. Nobles commissioned elaborate paintings that depicted every single step of the baking process in vibrant, meticulous detail. You can see scenes of servants grinding the grain, bakers kneading the vast mounds of dough, and rows of conical bread molds being placed into a roaring oven. This was not mere decoration. The Egyptians believed that the written or painted image contained the very essence of the thing it represented. By magically capturing the entire cycle of bread production on the tomb wall, they ensured the ritual was perpetually active. The spirit of the deceased could simply read the scenes, and the magic would conjure an endless, fresh supply of bread for their ka. This made the baker's craft truly immortal. His work, depicted in paint and stone, would literally sustain a soul for millennia. In the quiet darkness of the tomb, the baker's most important customer was not a god or a king, but a hungry spirit counting on his skill for all of eternity. The bread placed in a tomb was far more than a simple meal for the journey. It was a magical object designed to function in a realm beyond our own. This raises a tantalizing mystery for archaeologists. Was there a special funerary bread, a sacred recipe reserved only for the dead? The loaves found in Tutankhamun's tomb and others offer some clues, but the full recipe remains just out of reach. These tomb loaves often share the same conical shape as the sacred offering breads given to the gods, a shape that screams of creation and eternal life. This was clearly intentional. But did the baker use the same dough for a priest's offering and a pharaoh's eternal provision? Or did he whisper a different incantation over the flour for the one destined for the darkness of a burial chamber? The physical evidence is fragmentary. Analysis of the desiccated loaves shows they were made from the same emmer and barley that fueled the living. Yet we cannot rule out subtle, symbolic additions. Perhaps a sprinkle of fragrant myrrh, a resin imported from distant lands and used in the mummification process, was kneaded into the dough. This would have transformed the loaf into a fragrant offering, its scent meant to please the gods of the underworld as much as its substance was meant to feed the ka. Maybe a few precious coriander seeds or a drizzle of rare olive oil was added, not for flavor we could taste, but to imbue the bread with a higher spiritual potency. The loaf itself becomes a battery, storing not just calories but magical energy for the soul's arduous journey. The shape, the possible ingredients, the very act of its baking all point to one profound purpose. This was not bread meant to sustain a body, but to sustain an identity, a memory, a soul. It was the ultimate insurance policy against oblivion, baked to last not for a week but for an eternity. That same sacred dough, when baked with a different purpose, could become as hard and durable as stone. For travelers, soldiers, and merchants, the Egyptians perfected a bread that was not meant to be eaten fresh, but to survive for months. This was a cracker bread, a desiccated flatbread baked not once but twice. The process was simple and brilliant. A baker would first bake a normal, thin loaf. Then, while it was still warm, he would slice it open and place it back into the cooling oven. The residual heat would slowly and completely bake out every last trace of moisture, transforming the soft bread into a hard, brittle disc. This double-baked cracker was nearly indestructible. Without moisture, mold and bacteria could not take hold. It could be packed into sacks, loaded onto donkeys or boats, and endure the scorching heat of the desert or the damp humidity of a long river journey without spoiling. This was the ancient world's equivalent of a modern energy bar, a concentrated packet of calories that was lightweight, resilient, and ready for any expedition. A soldier on a campaign into Nubia or a trader following the incense routes into the Near East would have relied entirely on this practical food. His entire ration could be carried on his back, a stack of these cracker-like discs that would keep him fed for weeks. How do you actually eat a bread as hard as a roofing tile? You would never try to bite into it directly. The method was to soften it. At a rest stop, a soldier would take one of his cracker breads and crumble it into his wooden bowl. He would then pour water, or more commonly, his daily ration of beer over the fragments. The liquid would quickly soak into the porous, dry bread, rehydrating it into a soft, spoonable mush, a warm and filling meal reconstituted in minutes. This simple act of adding liquid brought the bread back to life, turning preserved calories into immediate sustenance. This innovation in food science was a quiet revolution. It meant that Egyptian influence was no longer tethered to the banks of the Nile. Armies could march farther and hold their ground longer, supported by a reliable supply chain of bread. Traders could venture into unknown territories, their donkeys laden with goods and these simple crackers. The humble cracker bread became a key that unlocked distant lands, fueling the trade networks that brought cedar from Lebanon and gold from Nubia back to the pharaoh's treasury. It was a testament to their genius, proving that the most powerful tool for expansion was not always a sword, but a perfectly preserved loaf. But the daily loaf was rarely just a plain canvas of grain. Egyptian bakers were masters of flavor, transforming simple bread into a savory, aromatic experience with a whole pantry of herbs and spices. A common household baker might need a handful of fragrant coriander seeds directly into the dough, their citrusy, slightly sweet note perfuming the entire loaf as it baked. He could add earthy, pungent cumin or the feathery green leaves of dill, which would impart a fresh, grassy flavor. One of the most popular additions was fenugreek, a spice with a unique maple-like aroma and a slightly bitter taste that mellowed beautifully during baking. These were not exotic luxuries, but everyday ingredients grown in kitchen gardens or traded in local markets, making flavored breads a regular part of life for many people, not just the elite. Each spice did more than just please the palate. Coriander was believed to soothe an upset stomach and aid digestion. Cumin was thought to be a powerful remedy for flatulence and colic. Fenugreek was used to treat everything from respiratory issues to inflammation. So when a baker added these spices to his dough, he was not just creating a tastier meal, he was baking a form of preventative medicine. A loaf of cumin-seeded bread was both a lunch and a tonic, a delicious way to maintain health in a world without modern pharmaceuticals. This practice reveals a society with a sophisticated understanding of the link between food and wellness long before the concept was given a name. The choice of which herb to use could even be seasonal, with cooling mint added in the summer heat or warming cumin favored during the cooler winter months. This culinary wisdom meant that the humble daily bread was a dynamic, living recipe, constantly adapted not just for taste but for the well-being of the entire community. This gritty reality is written in the bones and teeth of the people themselves. For all its life-giving power, the daily loaf carried a hidden, lifelong tax on the human body. Every time a woman ground grain on her stone saddle quern, microscopic fragments of the grinding stone itself, tiny shards of quartz and sandstone, flaked off and mixed inextricably with the flour. No amount of sifting could ever remove this fine, abrasive sand. It was an ingredient as constant as the grain, baked into the very fabric of their sustenance. When you eat sandpaper 3 times a day for 50 years, what happens to your teeth? The answer is etched into the skulls recovered from ancient cemeteries. The evidence is stark and undeniable. The teeth of these bread eaters are not just worn down, they are often ground nearly flat, with the protective enamel completely erased to reveal the softer, sensitive dentin underneath. In severe cases, the teeth are worn down to the gum line, a permanent, painful record of a lifetime of chewing this fortified bread. This extreme wear was not a slow, gentle process. It was a relentless abrasion that outpaced the tooth's natural ability to protect itself, and once the enamel was breached, the door to infection was flung wide open. The exposed dentin and pulp cavity became vulnerable to bacteria, leading to cavities and, far more dangerously, dental abscesses. These are severe infections at the root of the tooth, forming pockets of pus that cause excruciating pain, swelling, and fever. In an era before antibiotics, a severe dental abscess was not just a toothache, it was a potential death sentence. If the infection entered the bloodstream, it could lead to sepsis, killing an otherwise healthy person. This means the very food that sustained life could also, indirectly, end it. The skeletal record shows this was not a rare tragedy. Signs of abscesses and associated bone loss in the jaw are common, a silent epidemic of pain running just beneath the surface of society. This creates a haunting duality. The baker's craft was a noble and essential art, celebrated in tomb paintings and vital to the cosmic order. Yet, for the consumer, every comforting, filling mouthful was also a slow, grinding assault. The bread that built the pyramids also literally ground down the workers who ate it, a sobering reminder that survival in the ancient world always came with a physical price. This silent, miniature world held more power than 1,000 real loaves. Inside the tomb, alongside the actual provisions of bread, Egyptians placed incredibly detailed models of bakeries. Carved from wood and painted in vibrant colors, these were not toys. They were magical machines designed to operate for all of eternity. A typical model might be a foot long, showing the entire cycle of production in a single frozen moment. You see a group of tiny servant figures, their faces fixed in concentration, forever engaged in their tasks. One kneels over a stone quern, her miniature grinding stone poised mid-motion. Another stands beside a mixing trough, his hands sunk into a tiny ball of dough, and a third tends the oven, a careful hand reaching toward the clay dome. Every element is there, captured in perfect, scaled-down detail. Why go to such trouble when real bread was already in the tomb? The ancient Egyptians were practical people, and they understood a terrible risk. What if the physical bread rotted away? What if tomb robbers stole it? The magical models were the ultimate backup system. The Egyptians believed that the spirit or Ka could animate these scenes. The deceased could look upon the model and, through its perfect representation, command its magic. The tiny baker would grind, the dough would rise, and the oven would produce a never-ending supply of spiritual bread. The Ka would never go hungry because the process of creation itself was captured and made eternal. This was the genius of their belief. They did not just stock a pantry for the afterlife, they installed an entire self-sufficient bakery powered by magic and art. The same principle applied to the vast, beautiful paintings covering the tomb walls. A nobleman's eternal home would feature sprawling scenes of his estate, with a bakery as a central, vital feature. The paintings showed every step we have discussed, from the harvest in the fields to the final loaf emerging from the oven. These were not just reminders of a happy life on earth. They were functional diagrams. By depicting the entire chain of production, the tomb owner magically ensured that every single ingredient, every laborer, and every baker's skill was available to him forever. The wall scene was a perpetual motion machine for the soul, a guarantee that the rhythm of grinding and baking would continue uninterrupted long after the sun had set on his mortal life. In the darkness of the tomb, these models and paintings hummed with silent, purposeful activity, ensuring that the most fundamental comfort of life would continue, world without end. The very flour that coated the baker's hands was considered a divine gift, watched over by gods who understood its power. For an Egyptian baker, his daily work was a form of prayer, conducted under the direct patronage of specific deities. The most foundational of these was Tetanen, whose name means the risen land. He was not just an earth god, he was the physical embodiment of that first primordial mound, the exact same conical shape the bakers so carefully replicated in their sacred loaves. Every time a baker placed his dough into a conical mold, he was recreating the body of Tetanen, turning myth into something you could hold and eat. This was not a vague symbol, it was a direct, edible invocation of the moment creation began. Then there was Renenutet, a goddess whose presence was felt from the field to the final bite. She was often depicted as a coiled cobra or a woman with a serpent's head, a form that might seem frightening to us, but to the Egyptians she was the ultimate protector. As the goddess of the harvest, her spirit was believed to infuse the growing grain, ensuring it ripened to a golden bounty. But her role did not end at the threshing floor. Renenutet was also the goddess of nourishment, watching over the storage granaries and the act of eating itself. A baker would have whispered prayers to her, asking that the fermentation be strong and the loaves rise perfectly, for a failed batch was a sign of her disfavor. Before the annual harvest, and likely before a major baking session, a baker or a priest would make a small offering to these powerful beings. A perfect conical loaf, a jug of the first beer from the new grain, or a handful of the finest flour might be left at a small shrine. This was not superstition, it was a practical business transaction with the cosmos. By honoring Tetanen, the baker acknowledged the sacred geometry of his craft. By appeasing Renenutet, he sought her blessing for a successful transformation from raw grain to life-giving food. His work was a collaboration with the divine, a daily ritual that ensured both his community and the gods themselves remained well-fed and content. The heat of his oven was an extension of the sun's own fire, and his hands were the instruments of gods who shaped the world from dough and water. The baker and the brewer were partners in a single, life-giving enterprise. They worked with the same sacred grains, emmer and barley, transforming them into the two pillars of existence, bread and beer. This was not a coincidence, but a profound symbiosis. In the great state kitchens that fed the pyramid builders, these two artisans were likely side by side, their craft so deeply intertwined that one could not truly exist without the other. The brewer relied on the baker's understanding of fermented dough, while the baker often harnessed the brewer's powerful, live yeast. They were two halves of a single industry dedicated to turning grain into life. The beer they produced together was nothing like the clear, fizzy beverage we know today. It was a thick, cloudy, porridge-like substance, more akin to a liquid meal than a modern drink. It was only mildly alcoholic, just enough to make it safe from harmful bacteria, and it was packed with vitamins, minerals, and calories. This nutritious gruel was a daily staple for everyone, from the youngest child to the oldest elder, from the field laborer to the vizier in the palace. It was considered a fundamental right, a necessary part of a balanced diet. How did they create this liquid bread? The process was a masterpiece of practical chemistry. A brewer would start by lightly baking a large, flat loaf of barley bread. He was not trying to cook it all the way through, he only wanted to activate the enzymes in the grain. This partially baked, crumbly loaf was then broken into pieces and mixed with water in a large vat. The mixture was left to ferment. Wild yeast, either from the air or deliberately introduced from a previous batch, would feast on the sugars, turning the watery gruel into a mildly alcoholic, effervescent brew. Dates or other fruits were sometimes added for extra sweetness and flavor, but the foundation was always that crumbled, half-baked bread. This means that the very first step in brewing a batch of beer was in fact to bake a special kind of bread. Can you see the beautiful loop this created? Grain became bread, bread became beer, and the yeast from the beer could then be used to make the next batch of bread rise. It was a perfect, self-sustaining cycle of nourishment. This is why the ration for a laborer was always a combination of bread and beer. He was not being given two separate things, he was being given his sustenance in two different forms, solid and liquid. The bread provided the dense, slow-burning carbohydrates, while the beer offered hydration, quick energy, and essential nutrients in an easily digestible form. In the searing heat of the workday, this thick, nutritious beer was far safer to drink than water from a canal which could be contaminated. The baker and the brewer did not just feed the body, they protected it. Their inseparable crafts ensured that the entire civilization was hydrated, nourished, and secure, one shared batch of grain at a time. The baker's hands, stained with flour and calloused from the heat, could belong to a man in chains or a man of standing. In the rigid hierarchy of ancient Egypt, the baker's social position was a story of stark contrasts. For many, baking was a form of servitude. Countless unnamed individuals, likely slaves or indebted servants, spent their lives in the scorching heat of state-run or temple bakeries. Their world was one of relentless, grueling labor, their existence recorded only as a number in an administrative ledger detailing the thousands of loaves produced to feed the army or the pyramid crews. They were cogs in a vast, impersonal machine, their personal pride irrelevant to the endless demand for bread. Yet, standing above this anonymous crowd was the master baker. This was not a mere laborer, but a skilled artisan, a technician who understood the mysteries of fermentation and the subtle language of heat. His expertise was so valued that it could earn him a remarkable measure of respect. The proof is etched in stone in the tombs of these successful craftsmen. Inscribed for eternity on the walls of his own eternal home, a man named Ferment might be depicted not as a humble servant, but as the overseer of a bustling bakery directing a team of workers. His title and his profession are carved with pride, a permanent declaration that he was a master of his craft. This was a man who had achieved enough wealth and status to commission his own tomb, ensuring his name and his life's work would never be forgotten. How could the same profession encompass both the anonymous slave and the commemorated master? The answer lies in the context. Baking the simple, gritty loaves for the workforce was menial labor. But mastering the sacred recipes for the temple or creating the delicate, honey-soaked cakes for the palace was a specialized art. That skill, the ability to nourish gods and kings, could elevate a baker from a simple craftsman to a respected member of the community. His hands did the same work, but the purpose of his bread defined his place in the world. The theories and paintings come alive in the charred remains of a single, crumbling loaf. Across ancient sites like Amarna and the workers' village of Deir el-Medina, archaeologists have unearthed the actual, physical bread of the pharaohs. These are not artistic representations, but the real, carbonized loaves preserved for millennia by the very fires that baked them. One moment, a baker was pulling his batch from a hot oven. The next, perhaps a stray ember or a sudden kitchen fire caused the bread to fall into the flames, where it burned just enough to become a hardened, blackened shell. This accidental cremation is what saved it from decay, turning a daily meal into a permanent relic. These carbonized loaves are time capsules. Scientists can analyze them using advanced techniques to identify the exact grains used, the types of seeds kneaded into the dough, and even the invisible traces of yeast that once made them rise. They are the ultimate confirmation, proving that the conical shapes and seeded varieties we see in tomb paintings were not just artistic license, but a baker's daily reality. Beyond the bread itself, we can walk through the very rooms where it was made. At Deir el-Medina, the home of the artisans who built the royal tombs, the bakeries stand frozen in time. You can see the low, mud brick ovens, their domes blackened by countless fires. The grinding stones are still there, the heavy saddle querns set into the floor, their surfaces worn smooth and deeply concave from years of relentless back and forth motion. To stand in one of these rooms is to feel the presence of the bakers. You can almost hear the rhythmic crunch of grinding, smell the wood smoke, and the earthy scent of fermenting dough. These are not reconstructions, they are the original workplaces, abandoned but never truly lost. The evidence on the ground matches the idealized scenes on the tomb walls with stunning accuracy. The same types of ovens, the same layout of grinding stones, the same storage bins for grain. This connection between art and archaeology is powerful. It tells us that the Egyptians were not just depicting a fantasy of the good life, they were recording the actual, gritty mechanics of their daily survival. The tomb painting guaranteed magical sustenance for the afterlife, but the bakery ruins prove that same sustenance was created right here, in these very rooms, by real people whose tools still rest where they left them. That gritty, tangible evidence from ancient ovens has inspired a modern quest to taste the past. A small group of historians and experimental archaeologists have dedicated themselves to a delicious challenge, baking bread exactly as the Egyptians did. They start from scratch with sheaves of ancient emmer wheat and blocks of sandstone. The first hurdle is the brutal process of freeing the grain. Pounding the stubborn emmer with a stone mortar and pestle is a slow, exhausting effort, a battle against a grain that does not want to be tamed. Then comes the grinding on a replica saddle quern. Kneeling on the ground, pushing the heavy hand stone back and forth, they quickly understand the physical toll. Your shoulders burn, your back aches, and after an hour of relentless work, you might have only produced a single cup of coarse, speckled flour. It is a humbling experience that instantly redefines the value of a single loaf. Next, they must capture the wild yeast. They mix their flour with water and leave the paste in an open bowl, hoping the right microorganisms will find it. This is an unpredictable magic. Sometimes the mixture just sours, while other times it blooms with life, bubbling and expanding with a sharp, fruity aroma. They have learned to be patient, to watch and smell for the signs of a successful fermentation, just as an ancient baker would have done. The final test is the oven. They build a mud brick replica and heat it with a wood fire, judging the temperature by the color of the clay and the feel of the heat radiating from the opening. Pouring the wet, yeasted dough into a preheated conical mold creates an explosive hiss of steam. The moment of truth comes when they break open the cooled loaf. The results are surprising. The bread has a dense, moist crumb filled with irregular, chewy holes. The flavor is complex and robust, with a distinct, pleasant tang from the wild sourdough. You can taste the earthiness of the whole grain and the slight grit from the stone-ground flour. It is hearty, filling, and surprisingly delicious, more like a modern artisan sourdough than a bland historical replica. Nutritionally, it is a powerhouse packed with fiber, protein, and a suite of vitamins and minerals from the unrefined grain. This experimental bread connects the scholar to the laborer across thousands of years. The taste on your tongue is the same taste a pyramid builder knew, the same sustenance that powered an empire. This is not just a reconstruction, it is a resurrection, bringing the daily life of ancient Egypt to life in the most direct way possible, one truly ancient loaf at a time. That mastery of yeast and fire did not end at the borders of the Nile Valley. The knowledge of the Egyptian baker became one of antiquity's most valuable exports, a quiet technology that would reshape the diets of empires to come. When the Greeks established the city of Naucratis in the Nile Delta as a trading post, they were not just there for gold and papyrus, they were there to learn. Greek merchants and soldiers witnessed the Egyptian baker's art firsthand, marveling at the tall, airy loaves rising from conical molds. They saw the organized, high-output bakeries and understood the power of leavened bread. The Greeks eagerly adopted these techniques, but they also put their own stamp on them. They moved away from the conical mold, pioneering free-standing loaves baked directly on the oven floor, and they developed a wider vocabulary of bread shapes, naming over 70 different varieties. The Egyptian foundation was now a Greek institution. This culinary revolution then traveled west, straight into the heart of the rising Roman Republic. The Romans, ever the practical engineers, took the craft and industrialized it. They saw bread not just as sustenance, but as a tool of state control. The phrase bread and circuses was a real political strategy, and to enact it, they needed bread on a colossal scale. Roman bakeries, like those unearthed at Pompeii, were vast factories with multiple millstones turned by donkeys or slaves, and massive, permanent ovens that could produce thousands of loaves a day. The basic principle, however, remained unchanged: the captured wild yeast, the fermented dough, the transformative heat. All of it was a direct inheritance from the mud brick ovens of Egypt. The leavened loaf, perfected along the Nile, became the absolute cornerstone of the Mediterranean diet, and by extension, the entire foundation of Western cuisine. Without that ancient breakthrough, the baguette, the ciabatta, and the sourdough boule would simply not exist. The ghost of the Egyptian baker lives on in every airy crumb. That legacy is not confined to history books. Step into a modern artisanal bakery today, and you will witness the same ancient rhythms performed with only slightly refined tools. The steady, rhythmic sound of a baker kneading a large batch of dough by hand is the direct echo of the kneader in a state bakery at Giza. The careful nurturing of a sourdough starter, a living culture passed from one batch to the next, is the exact same practice Egyptian bakers used to keep their wild yeast alive for generations. Even the intense, radiant heat of a modern brick oven operates on the same principle as those mud brick domes, using thermal mass to bake bread evenly and impart a characteristic crust. The entire process, from grinding the grain to the final, fragrant pull from the oven, creates an unbroken chain stretching back 5,000 years. Every time a baker scores the top of a loaf before baking, they are performing the same ritual as the Egyptian who pressed a sacred stamp into the dough. We are still breaking bread with the pharaohs, connected by the universal, timeless alchemy of flour, water, and fire. The baker's simple, daily craft was the quiet engine of a civilization. It fueled the muscle that raised impossible monuments. It pleased the gods who controlled the universe, and it offered a tangible promise of life beyond death. From the coarse, gritty loaf that was a laborer's wage to the ornate, honey-soaked cake presented to a pharaoh, bread was the common thread woven through the very fabric of ancient Egyptian existence. It was currency, sacrament, medicine, and art, all held within a warm, golden crust. So the next time you break a piece of bread from a loaf, take a moment to remember the bakers of the Nile. Thousands of years ago, in the heat of their clay ovens, they were perfecting the alchemy of flour and fire, a craft that still nourishes and connects us across the vast expanse of time. What part of their story resonated most with you? Was it the sacred shape of the conical loaf, or the gritty reality of the pyramid builder's daily ration? Share your favorite discovery in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this journey into the mysteries of the ancient world, be sure to subscribe for our next adventure.